know this me. Tryna tell you, baby, I just wanna take my team all the way to the top where we supposed to be. Eat them hitters way down underneath my feet. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just tryna feed my family. Lord, keep me safe while I'm out here jamming.
What's going on? It's your boy AD,
This is Salamahn.
and you watching.
Reparations TV.
Today, we want to talk a little bit about the stimulus package that just passed, $1.9 trillion. Joe Biden got it done with very little help from the Republican Party. I don't even know if any of them voted for it. I know a lot of them were against certain clauses in it. A lot of them felt like maybe they will be given handouts by passing this bill and providing economic relief during these tough and arduous times that we're dealing with here in America, not just as black people, but as a people totally. Solomon, how do you feel about the stimulus package? Do you feel like it's enough right now to help people that are in need? And, should they have passed it sooner? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a few things that come to mind. First of all, as far as the time you say should have been passed sooner, I mean, I think that's a no-brainer. I feel as though it should have been passed way sooner, and that it's kind of unfortunate how the people that represent us or are supposed to represent us in the Senate were kind of like focusing on things that had nothing to do with us being in a global pandemic right now. Like, I understand the whole Trump impeachment situation, but how can that be priority over you talking about 300 plus million Americans potentially suffering right now? And you don't know what condition any one person is in. So, I mean, it should have been way more expedient. And is it enough? I don't think it's even close to being enough, especially when you look at the GDP of this country and then you look at other supposed first world countries or developed countries and how they're handling the financial aspect of the pandemic. It's just it's sad. It really is. It's not even close to being enough. I know people personally that's still suffering from lack of finances, and that 1,400 is not enough to get an ant full, as far as I'm concerned, to be honest with you. So that's my take on that. I mean, we need a lot more than 1,400. Not even to mention, some people feel cheated about the fact that it wasn't even really supposed to be 1,400. That they were promised the full 2,000 in addition to the 600.
You're right.
And it's just a lot of word play and a lot of word twisting and technology involved in that. And that's a whole nother topic. But no, it's not enough. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the funny thing is, I heard a lot of people giving 45 credit, Donnie credit, because
I
the,
heard
the
that too.
2000 was something that we heard come out of his mouth first. We didn't hear that come out of Joe Biden's mouth first. And then he said, what did he say? Within the first 30 days, it would be passed. And he was inaugurated, what, January 20th? It's been several months, at least twice as long as what he said it was going to be. Now, granted, he did not have a lot of bipartisan support, and a lot of these things get held up when you're dealing with Congress, you're dealing with Senate, you're dealing with different parties, different ideologies. I understand that, but at the same time, it's a lot of people really struggling, and we look at what the billionaire class has amassed in the last 12 to 14 months of this pandemic. It's otherworldly, some of the money that they're just receiving. That the Jeff Bezos of the world, the Mark Zuckerbergs. We can go on and on with different billionaires that have really widened the gap. Bernie Sanders himself said $15 an hour is not even a living wage. Walmart, pretty much their employees average $11 an hour, meaning you can work 40 hours a week, 80 hours a paycheck, 160 hours a month, and still be living below the poverty line. So us average Americans, us middle class people, are paying for people who work full time when their billionaire owners won't pay them enough to even afford a 1 bedroom apartment or a car loan, let alone car insurance, food, gas, clothing. I mean, this country, man, we got to take a long look in the mirror and just prioritize better. This is supposed to be the land of opportunity. That's what they say.
Supposedly.
But who does that opportunity encompass? Who are they talking about when they say this is the land of opportunity? Because the gap between the rich and poor has never been wider, and I don't want to hear anything about there being a strong middle class. The middle class does not exist. In this country, you either have money, you have wealth, or you don't. And right now, 99% of us are struggling or just finding a way to scrape by, and 1%, they probably own islands in the Caymans and helipads, helicopters, clones, space shuttles. They planning to go to outer space from all I hear. So at the end of the day, this package was not enough. $1.9 trillion sounds like a lot of money on surface, but the taxpayers always end up footing the bill either way. They always say, where's the money going to come from? We know where it's going to come from. We'll pay for it eventually. Because everything that they hand out to us, we eventually pay for it.
That's true. And not even to mention, going off of what you're talking about as far as the minimum wage, really think about this for a second. They're proposing that this minimum wage, this $15 an hour minimum wage, is supposed to come into effect in 2025. By the time 2025 hits, based off of what I'm seeing right now, that $15 an hour isn't going to mean jack squat in the grand scheme of things. You would have to project well beyond 2025 and what the minimum wage would need to be at that time for that to even mean anything. You might need well into the $20 or $25 an hour minimum wage based off of what I'm seeing right now, because all that's going to happen is, especially with these billionaires really amassing this amount of wealth like we've never really seen before at this rate. I mean, you're talking about potentially massive inflation happening at that point in time. And that $15 an hour isn't going to really do anything by the time it's in effect. Not to mention, I mean, even with that being said, there was a lot of, and I don't care what side of the partisan that you're on, but supposedly there were, like 8 or 9 Democrats that voted against the
Really?
Yeah, that's true.
I
It was like
ain't see
8 or
that.
9. They called them out too. I have to look up what the names were. There was like 7 or 8 or 9 Democrats that voted against the minimum wage.
Did they have logic behind what they were saying, or
I mean,
it was any reason?
that's I believe that's why there's this whole thing of some conservatives believe that there's rhinos and Republican. They call them Republicans in name only. They believe that there's dinos, Democrats in name only. That really they call themselves Democrats, but they're not really true Democrats in the sense of what we imagine Democrat. What values for them to stand on and what their agenda is. So yeah, there were people that voted. Several Democrats that voted against that.
Well, I just looked something up. In the U.S., there are 614 billionaires. The population in the U.S. is somewhere around 340 million, 350. Don't quote me on that. I'm close. I know that. 614 people are billionaires. What are they really going to do with this wealth? What can they do with it when they're gone? I guess, you could pass it down to your family, create a legacy. I get that. But how much is too much? We're living in a country where greed seems to take priority over the well-being of the people. And this was supposed to be e pluribus unum, one nation, under God, indivisible. That's what they say. But in all actuality, it seems like it's every man for himself out here. And if that's the world we're living in, if that's the country that we're living in, just tell us that. Don't tell us that you represent us. And then when it comes down and it's time to help people out who've been unemployed for an entire year, who've been scraping and scratching just to be able to, turn the lights on or put food in the refrigerator, don't tell us that this nation cares about its citizens when it's showing otherwise. And, that's really what I have a problem with is the hypocrisy. This is a democracy of hypocrisy. That's what Malcolm X always used to say. Because everything the country says it is the opposite. It says it's against monopolies, but then Amazon owns everything. I can't go anywhere and Amazon not there. I got Alexa in every room. And so does everybody else. A package comes, it's Amazon man coming down the street. They say that there aren't any monopolies, right? But when you go to a grocery store and you see 500 items, it's like 6 companies that control those 500 items. All umbrella companies. How Coca-Cola owns all of these other subsidiaries that you would never even know were underneath of that banner. and they make it look like there are a bunch of different companies when in all actuality, they don't give you a choice in capitalism, but they say you have choices. They say you have options. There's no monopolies, right? It's an illusion of inclusion. And the small business owners, those are the ones who have been hurting probably the most or potentially the most. I see this whole big deal about restrictions. The mayor of Baltimore City, Brandon Scott, shout out Brandon. He's supposed to come on here, and we're going to get you on here, Brandon. But for real, Brandon Scott put a lot of restrictions on small business owners. I can be critical of somebody and still admire them personally. I'm critical of him for the sheer fact that these small businesses, if they miss 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, some of them have to close their doors for good. Walmart, Amazon, all of these big companies could close for 6 years and come back out and be right back where they were. As much money as they've amassed, as much power, as many resources as they have. These small businesses, they need that day-to-day transaction from customers. If you're saying that there's no safe way to bring people in and to allow them to spend money, to allow people to keep their doors open, keep their heat on, keep their lights on, then just say that. But if you're just saying that because they're not big enough and they don't make enough money and they're not important enough that they can't stay open, meanwhile, the major corporations have never closed, not for a second. And, I have a big problem with that. Another thing I wanted to get to is just the difference or to juxtapose how much you receive as a single sole person or a head of household with dependents and compare and contrast that to how much you receive as a business. As an individual that's in charge of their household that files maybe 0 or 1 claims dependents, you receive $1,400 in this second stimulus. I guess it's the third technically
It's the
because
third stimulus.
the first was 600. The first was
12,000.
1,200.
The 12,000. That's what it was.
It was 1,200.
1,200.
Right?
Excuse me.
Yeah,
1,200.
It was 1,200 at first. Then the second was 600, and this one is 14. But technically, this to me kind of is a combination of the second one because it was supposed to be 2,000 in totality.
They call it the full second stimulus.
The full second stimulus. That's what they're calling it, right? But you receive 1,400, and then if you have a husband or a wife, you receive 2,800, so 1,400 per person, and then you can receive 1,400 per additional dependent. Sometimes it could be a child or also an adult dependent, maybe somebody that's disabled that you take care of. Now, on the flip side, if you own a business, the EIDL advancement program gives you $10,000, and you don't even have to pay that back. Also, you can receive up to $10 million on a PPP side of loans, and you get a low interest rate that you can pay back over years. I think it's maybe 20 or 30 years that you get to pay it back. It just doesn't make sense to me that individuals who are suffering so much, most they can get is what, 5,600 if they have a couple kids or something like that, 7,400. Don't quote me, my math might be off. And these corporations can receive $10 million. What do you think about that?
Well, what do you really expect? I mean,
not much different.
This whole country was built off of keeping that wealth gap relevant. So, I mean, honestly, it's like everything that has transpired, especially with the last term that we've been in, should have really been an eye opener. And now that metaphorically speaking, the crap has hit the fan, now we're being forced to open our eyes and see the reality of what we're living in. I feel like a lot of us have been living in a dreamland, and now that it's directly affecting you, now you can express a little bit more empathy for what other people are going through. Some family members, I mean, we're talking about the financial aspects of the stimulus. How about let's take it back real quick to the health aspect of it all. We are still in the middle of a world pandemic. People are still dying, right? So when you really paint this picture and people are dying, people are, losing their livelihoods. Now, granted, it's getting a little better. It's definitely getting a little better. But it's not over. And there's a lot of people treating it like it's over, to be honest with you.
Yeah, they outside
You
with
know,
it.
they treating it like it's over. And part of saying that they're treating it like it's over, it's not just regular citizens. Of course, the major corporations, as far as they're concerned, it never was a thing. Like you said, like a lot of these larger corporations, they never close the doors. They then classify under the essential status, like your WalMarts and stuff like that. Now I understand it is essential to need groceries, to need to go to the hospital and things like that. But put this into perspective, our healthcare industry is a for-profit industry. You got to understand that. And anytime something like this happens, you got to follow where the money's going. You really do. Look at who really benefits from this all when you think about it. So, you know, yeah, that package, like you said, what is 2,800, 5,600 is nothing compared to what some of these companies have received, not just in, to help them recover from the losses they may have experienced, but also what they've actually grossed and made from the fact that there's a global pandemic. I mean, you're talking about people just rolling in dough.
Some of them got
Right
money
now.
and they were making money the entire time.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So it's like, I mean, these corporations, they ain't hurting by any stretch of the imagination. Matter of fact, they loving it. And you can tell they're loving it by how they're moving. You know, people that I know personally still talking about how their company hasn't even uttered the words hazard pay to them. Really let this sink in. Like, okay, you're an essential company. You get to stay open, right? Well, in order for your company to operate, you need people with their boots on the ground really doing the grunt work to continue the operations of your company. You need cashiers, you need nurses, you need ICU. These are your what they call essential workers. And this kind of goes back to something that you had said in a conversation I had with you about receiving a gold star and a pat on the back. Like they give you this nomenclature, essential worker, to make you feel better about what you're doing. How about that bread?
Mm-hmm.
If you really value an employee and say that they're so essential, you should compensate them
Kick
for the
that bread
risk.
out.
That's right, because every time that they go to work, I mean, they're taking a risk to get sick. It's people still getting sick on my job. I just received an email last week. Another person caught, COVID. Now they never disclose who it was, but they just say, hey, we're notifying you. There was an individual that tested positive for COVID, and this individual was in the building from this date to that date. So what that says is that we're still in the middle of this thing, and people are still dying from it. So all in all, these companies are they're not really hurting the larger ones. Like you said, they could be closed for 6 years and still be okay. So it's just sad, man. But I mean, like I said, what do you really expect? This whole country was founded on that wealth gap.
Yeah, and
And
America's a corporation first and
that's right.
foremost. That's one thing that we got to realize. It's not a country, it's a corporation. They have a GDP.
Hmm.
They pretty much have a tax ID, EIN. They are a corporation, and number one in America has always been to amass as much wealth as possible. That's the bottom line. That's why, we always go back to slavery. We'll take it back there. This country started with free labor, and now they're trying to get the cheapest labor possible, and they'll pass the cost on to the consumer, which is the citizen, and then they'll blame them for not having enough money to be able to afford to live a decent lifestyle. It's your fault because you don't work hard enough, or you don't have the skill set, or you don't have the education, when a lot of these people are stepping into situations that were created for them 100, 200 years ago, and all they had to do was not drop the ball. That's pretty easy to become a multi-millionaire when you were born a multi-millionaire. If you guys want a pat on the back for that, I got you. But all in all, it's a great country that we live in, but we're going to hold you to the highest standards possible because we see the BS. We smell it too. And America, if you really are about your citizens and making sure everybody has some sort of equality or equity, you got to do better on the stimulus, man. That 1.9 trillion, it wasn't enough. And another thing I wanted to discuss was Lindsey Graham actually used the word reparations when talking about the stimulus package.
Heard about that.
You heard about that? Now, there was actually an article in the New York Times where he was pretty much trying to expose a clause inside of the stimulus package that provides relief of up to 120% for black farmers as well as other minority farmers. What Graham said to Fox News was, in the bill, if you're a farmer, your loan will be forgiven up to 120% if you're African American or some other minority. But if you're a white person, no forgiveness. That's reparations, Graham said. What does that have to do with COVID? Now, the American Rescue Plan set aside $10.4 billion for agricultural support, with about half of that amount set aside for minority farmers, according to reports. So $5.2 billion was set aside for minority farmers. Graham seems to think that setting money aside to help minority farmers is reparations. Do you agree with that in any way?
Well, first of all, okay, even if it's not even about whether I agree whether it's reparations or not, even whether it is or not, at the end of the day, it's still part of an assistance package to help Americans. At the end of the day, it's like this, man. Let's say it is reparations. If it's reparations, that's not even like a fraction of a percent really to justify, to undo the wrong of anything. If you really think about it, like, there are calculations of how much reparations are owed in the totality that goes into the teens of trillions of dollars.
The gazillions.
So
The
that little
gabillions.
amount, a fraction of 1.9 trillion, is nothing to sneeze at all, even if it is a form of reparations.
Yeah,
I just read an
5.2
article talking about how the Catholic Church wanted to raise $100 million for reparations for Black America. Now some people were saying that, at least they're trying. It's a good first step, but you guys gotta understand, $100 million compared to the trillions of dollars. You're talking about orders of magnitude much, much higher than that. Really think about it. 100 million after an order of magnitude of a million, talking about a billion. 1,000 times that is a trillion, and that's just 1 trillion. You're talking about upwards in the teens of trillions, or in the 20s of trillion, even higher than that. Some people even 40 something $trillion. So if it is reparations, that's not going to do jack squat anyway. But let's go ahead and humor it real quick. First of all, a lot of people don't really know this, but I did some research on the different disenfranchisement of Black farmers in the South. And this is something that goes back such a long, well, actually, I don't think it's really that long time ago, but
100-something years ago.
yeah, let's say 100-something years ago. So there was an event called the Elaine Massacre that happened in Alabama. And pretty much, to make a long story short, there was a point in time where we had a lot more Black farmers in America than we do now. It was like over, I think, like 300,000.
Yeah, it was the first profession that we had in America.
Right. Even if, there were a lot of many free Blacks that were illiterate at the time, and they pretty much already knew what to do from being in the role that they played, while they were slaves. So we had an abundance of Black farmers. And pretty much what ended up happening was, at some point in time, when it came down to the paperwork between Black farmers getting their just pay and their penance from the crops that they sold, you're talking about some real Jim Crow stuff here. Like, even down to the seeds that they were using. They weren't able to afford seeds. Like, there were like these crazy price hikes and just like all these Jim Crow rules and stipulations put in, just pretty much just to trip you up. And it got to the point where people started speaking out about it, and there was an effort to right those wrongs and make things a little bit more justifiable. Well, those white Southerners down there, they weren't really having that. So it came to a point where there was a meeting, and that meeting ended up turning violent. Like, there was some shots that were fired. And they claim no one knows who shot first. But pretty much what ended up happening after that, after the shots were fired, was the black farmers, they shot back because they said, well, we're not going to just let you just kill us. So in the midst of shots being fired, a white man was killed.
Right.
So of course they weren't having that. So they said, you know what? Since one white man was killed, we're going to make sure that we kill every Negro. So what ended up happening was they actually put out a poster. And I'm going to actually read what the poster said. There's a poster that they put up all around town. It said, Negroes plan to kill all whites. Slaughter was to begin with 21 prominent men as the first victims. Quote unquote, we just begun is the password. Blacks had armed themselves and planned to kill every white person in sight when plot was exposed. A blatant, flat out lie. But pretty much this was the tool that they used to go ahead and essentially lynch any Negro in sight, and that's exactly what they did. Not only that, but I don't remember who was the one that gave the call, but they actually got federal forces to come and assist them, along with members of the Ku Klux Klan, to come and assist them to do this. And their instruction was given to, this is their instruction that they were given. They were instructed to detain every Negro in sight. And if the Negro didn't surrender, then it was pretty much open range and fire. Now, let's keep it real. Do you really think that they were waiting for a Negro, so-called Negro, to surrender at the time? No, what they did was they just opened fire on black men, women, children, and babies. They did not discriminate based on age. And I believe the death toll was like in the hundreds, like either over 100 or 200 black people were killed. And the crazy thing about that, no one was ever charged, of course, but the crazier thing about it, this happened in 1919. This was at the tail end of an era that was coined the Red Summer of 1919, where all over the East Coast, whites actually came out and was slaughtering black people. Even up until you think it won't happen in D.C., it was happening in D.C., it was happening in Baltimore, it was happening in Alabama, it was happening in Florida, all up and down the East Coast, even in Chicago.
Yeah.
They were going around and just killing every Negro in sight. They would take one little thing and use that as a tool, as an excuse to say, oh, you did this, I'm gonna, kill every Negro in sight. One of the things that I saw that was so petty that was used to do that was, I read that there was a situation where there was a black person that didn't move out of a white man's way fast enough, or a white woman's way quickly enough, as they say, and they were killed just for not moving out of their way fast enough. They want you to be a slave. They view you as a subhuman being.
They view you as property.
As property.
And they still do.
Even less than a dog. They wouldn't even treat a dog like that.
No, they love their dogs more.
But the truth is they really hate you, is what it is.
They hate you because they ain't you.
Right.
In all reality.
Now, mind you, the context that I'm talking about is during that time. Now, that's not to say that all white people feel that way today. But
we talk about races.
Yeah, we're talking about race, but there's enough of them at that time. And, some of them still do feel that way, but I acknowledge that times are changing. And people's minds are starting to change in the sense that they're not really going for that anymore. But this is what was accepted. And you know what? When they were lynching these people, they had white men, white women, and white children would sit there and watch. They would actually have concessions.
It's like a barbecue, pretty much.
Yeah, a BBQ.
Or they were watching a baseball game, pretty much. They'd sit there, pop their little popcorn, or eat their little snacks. And when he went up, and he was hanging from that tree, that's when they got the giddiest and the happiest.
That's right.
And then when he died, they slapped 5, they had a couple beers, and they went home about their lives. And then they would take their head and they would put it in a window or somewhere that everybody could see, or they would leave the body sitting there for days upon time. And anytime somebody got out of line that was black, they would point to that body and pretty much let you know you could be right next to him on that tree. So America has had a crazy history when it comes down to race relations, especially with the lynchings in the South. Before that, slavery, Jim Crow era. Even today with, the mass incarceration that we're seeing in the school-to-prison pipeline. It's a whole lot of things that we can definitely unpack. Reparations TV. One more thing I wanted to say about the black farmers is literally only 2% of farmers in America are African American. African Americans own about 35,000 farms in the United States. As a matter of fact, it's less than 2%. So, Mr. Graham, if you're talking about reparations, that ain't enough, bruh. A lot of us have a lot of other professions, and you guys owe and you gonna pay. And y'all can keep saying these racist, veiled comments all y'all want. We know what you're saying. We know what you're doing. It's not 1925 anymore, and it's not gonna work. But that's a story for another episode. We about to get out of here. Make sure y'all subscribe, like, follow the YouTube, hit us up on the Patreon, hit the Cash App, you know, $ reparations brand. Anything else you got to say to him, Solomon?
I mean, the only thing I got left to say about that is, you know, in regards to the Lindsey Graham, there needs to be a whole segment that we do on what I like to call pseudo ignorance, meaning that a lot of these people act like they can't understand or that they don't understand the plight of different people around in this country and around the world, but he knows well better about things like we're disenfranchised in regards to the metrics regarding the percentage of black farmers in America. He's aware of these things, but the fact is that he benefits from the disenfranchisement.
Yeah,
so
we gonna get him later though.
we gonna get him later. So that's all I got to say about that. To you all watching at home, questions, comments, concerns, send them to TV at reparationsbrand.com. We would love to hear from you all.
Also follow us on Instagram at reparationsbrand. Follow us on Twitter at reparationsbr. This is AD.
And this is Salamahn.
And you're now watching Reparations TV. Cheers.